Hi, I'm Rowan from howtosingforyourlife.com, and today we've actually got a guest. I have here with me Gwyneth Jones from magiclifecoaching.co.uk, and this is just to give you a bit of extra expertise for all of the things that you might need for building your confidence to do some gigs or performances, and some of the new things that you might be trying in your life. So, first of all, I'd like to hand it over to Gwyneth to just explain a little bit more about what you do.
Okay, so what I do is I work with people who feel stuck in their lives, that maybe need to make big decisions, and I look at sort of what's holding them back from making those leaps, from doing what they really want to do with their lives. And often it is a case of confidence. So last month I created a course called Shine with Self-Confidence, and basically, I help work with people over 5 weeks to just build up their confidence, and it looks at a lot of different things, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute.
Yeah, I particularly like that podcast. I was listening to it on the metro. So maybe perhaps the first question I'd want to ask you is what tips you might have about people wanting to build their confidence for talking about their creative work. How can people best find a way of saying those sorts of things confidently?
Yeah, because it's really important when you're talking to other people, just networking and telling people what you do, that you say it with confidence. Because if you go there and say, you just go, oh, I'm a musician, and you don't seem to really take it seriously yourself, or if you say you just got a role in something and you might not think it's the biggest role, but you kind of brush it off as if it's nothing.
Yeah, like, oh, it's just a small part.
Then, people will believe you, they'll say, well, okay, then this is nothing impressive, and they won't give you the support that you want in return. Whereas if you go there confidently and say, well, yeah, I'm a musician, or I'm an actress, then that conviction will kind of help to get the support back from people. And it's something that I did myself. I'd go to people, oh yeah, I did this course in life coaching, it's just a stupid thing. And so of course they're not going to react that well to that. They're definitely not going to want to hire you in that case. So you kind of have to practice saying it in a confident way where you believe in it, and maybe looking at why you're brushing it off, why you're putting yourself down in front of other people, And a lot of the time it's because you assume that they're going to judge you anyway. And that you kind of preempt it, so you put yourself down before they can do it to protect yourself. Really, how to change that is firstly to realise, like I said, you can't read minds, you don't know what they're going to think. And secondly, just knowing that if you say it with confidence and conviction, then they're much more likely to believe in you as well and to take you seriously.
That's a really good point. I think it's very easy, especially if you're just starting out with something, to sort of say, oh, well, I do a bit of acting or I do a bit of singing, and we have this expression, a bit of, that we use quite a lot.
What does it mean?
Okay, my next question then would be what advice you might have for people who are trying to build up their confidence for maybe an audition or a performance of some kind, and how they could even handle feelings of nervousness in the moment of that.
Okay, well, this is something I used to do a lot myself. I was in some amateur drama companies, and I even auditioned for something here in Prague, actually. And I think building your confidence to actually do it, I think the first thing is to sign yourself up so that you can't back out as easily, because then you've got that motivation, you have to be there. Of course, practice it a lot, but I think I fell into the trap myself of recording myself watching it and picking it apart so much, that I destroyed my own confidence in it. I'd go, oh, I don't like the way I move my eyes in that second. And you can't practice for everything, and it'll never be perfect. And I think a lot of people think they can't put themselves out there in the world until they're perfect. First, of course, perfection is a myth. So no matter how many times you practice, no matter how, flawlessly you get that one time you record it at home, things will change. And if you never put yourself out there, then you'll never get the feedback either. Maybe think of it as your first few auditions shouldn't be successful, that you should mess up enough to ask the directors, well, could you give me some tips, could you give me some feedback? Because you can't grow unless you're willing to trip up a bit along the way. And then, when you're in the moment of the audition, of course, yeah, there's a lot of fear that can come up. Now, one way that I found is, well, it is acting, but is before you go in, you know, create a character for yourself that is you, but confident, so that you kind of step into that character and that you're playing somebody who is fearless about this audition and can just walk in and do it.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's actually something that I mentioned in, I think, my first video that people get from signing up, and that is the idea that if you have an audition and you go into it as a character of someone who's been doing this for years, everyone knows that you're already an expert at it, you've got nothing to prove to anyone. So even if you make a mistake, they're just going to say, oh, she's a bit croaky today, or, you know, she's obviously a bit tired today or whatever, but it doesn't make a lot of difference. You know, they still see you as this is the person that they're, you know, they know is a famous singer or whatever.
Right.
So it's just really interesting when someone's backing up something I said.
Oh, you got it, yeah.
Excellent.
And there's another point with it too, because if you go in as you, as Rowan, as Gwyneth, and you do something wrong, you feel like it reflects badly on you, but if you're there as your character, then it's not really, you know, you that's being judged if you do it wrong, it's your character. So it kind of gives you that layer of protection as well against, you know, scary judgment.
Okay, next question would be, so in your Lovely Confidence podcast that I was listening to, you mentioned ways in which people sometimes sabotage their own sense of confidence or self-esteem by the kind of what we call sort of negative self-talk.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely.
Explain what that is.
Well, so negative self-talk is anything you think to yourself that essentially holds you back, and usually, you know, we don't even realise we're doing it. So it's, for example, if you've considered going for an audition or you've considered taking a big step, but something in your head is like, no, you can't do that. And it's usually something along the lines of, oh, you're not good enough, or you're not pretty enough, or you're not as good as that person. You know, it's often a lot of comparing ourselves to somebody else, and usually to somebody who doesn't really exist, this kind of perfect person that we think is out there, and we kind of forget that other people have flaws and insecurities at that point. So, yeah, and sometimes you're really aware of that voice, and other times it's not until, you know, you become really mindful, you start to watch your own thoughts, that you realise what you're telling yourself, and maybe what you've been telling yourself your whole life, and it can be kind of scary to go, oh, well, I'm constantly telling myself, you know, that I'm stupid, that I'm not talented, and of course the more you tell yourself that, then it becomes true, because, yeah, you're kind of reaffirming it. So first, you know, learn to recognise when you're doing it, and that can be, from trying to watch your thoughts, from trying to talk out loud maybe, and you can catch these thoughts because they're normally something like too much or not enough something, you know? You're, I don't know, like I'm too fat or I'm not thin enough or whatever. That's one, you know, with looks, it's a big anxiety with performing arts definitely, and other things like extreme jumps. So for example, I didn't get that part, therefore I can't act and I'll never become an actor. You know, so everyone's had those moments. Yeah. So it's kind of recognising these extreme thoughts that can't really be true, you know, and kind of, then I say attack them with logic, you know, so I didn't get that part equals I'll never be an actor. Well, you know that couldn't really make sense, you know, because it's one part. And of course, there are so many reasons why you didn't get it. It could be just that someone amazing came in. There's always, you weren't right for the role, but it's imagining the statement in your head like, oh, I can't act, and asking, well, could I prove that scientifically, you know? What's the evidence behind it? And
like whether it would hold up in a court of law, if someone's actually trying you for that, could they really prove it?
Yeah, you can have a little trial in your head, you know, with evidence for, and also, another thing, I can't remember where I picked this up, but it's imagine that the opposite is true and think of all the evidence for that, you know, because often you know deep down that there's plenty of evidence that say you can act or that people do like you. It's just you ignore that. You're very selective in what you remember when you're in this kind of negative way of thinking. Practice reminding yourself of the opposite side, of the positive things, and like I talked about in the podcast, right? Negative thoughts, I likened it to a path through the forest. So you always take the same path, and so the grass gets worn down and the branches have moved out of the way, and so the easiest way to think is this negative path. Like, oh, I'm going to give up because I didn't get this one part, or I messed up, therefore I'm terrible. And if you start thinking in a more positive way, like, okay, I made a mistake, so this is something to work on in the future, or, well, I did my best, you know, I have to keep trying, otherwise I won't get better. Yeah, the more you practice this kind of positive self-talk, then you start to make a new path through the forest, and it's harder, because you start from nothing, but the more you kind of walk over this path, I guess, then the easier it becomes, until it's the default, you know.
Yeah, I love that analogy that you had in your podcast. That was great. And I think it's also very related to the kind of research they've done about these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Of actually, the neurons in the brain are actually,
course,
you know,
yeah.
the new ones are created by having some new thought patterns.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, something that I found really useful as well is that when you catch yourself sort of having that negative self-talk, it's very easy to then almost double it by reprimanding yourself for having that thought, and so you're kind of, oh, I'm always doing that, that's terrible, oh god, and so you've just compounded the whole thing, you know. And so in a sense it's more about having that awareness that you've had that, but being completely neutral about that, so that you can say, okay, that's interesting that I thought that, that's interesting, that's perhaps the 5th time I've thought something like that, and being able to just observe it almost with no judgment, but just kind of adding it up and thinking, okay, let's question whether this is helpful or not, rather than just automatically trying to, you know, eradicate it in the sense of, you know, this is bad behaviour by me, I need to eradicate that.
Exactly. Yeah, don't beat yourself up when you find the negative thoughts. It's about watching them and realising that they're there, not telling yourself off and trying to stop it. And often you can ask yourself, where is this thought, you know, where has this thought come from? That's the other thing. Often it's just something from your childhood, or, you know, bad experiences where people have told you that you're not good enough, and you've kind of believed them, maybe without realising it. And of course we get these messages from the media that, well, you'll never be as rich and beautiful as these people. And of course we don't know anything about those people really, how much makeup they need to look that good, how happy they are, you know.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this negative self-talk stuff, because, you know, I really do think that's an area that can really sabotage your work, and also at the same time it's within your control to change it, you know, and you don't need lots and lots of money to do it, you just need to be able to observe what's happening. So that kind of brings me now to my final question, which is more about the big leaps in life, the things when you want to make a really big change in your life. What advice would you have for maybe an actor who's thinking of moving to LA to improve their career, or maybe a singer moving to a big city to, you know, be able to connect more with a music scene? How do people get past the fears that might come from something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know so much about moving for those reasons, but I definitely can think about when I moved to Japan. The first time I'd left the UK properly, and I just packed up and moved to this country I'd never been to with, you know, 2 suitcases. Of course, it's not always the wisest idea, you've got to have some kind of plan, but for the fear itself, I'd say the first thing is to, like, take it step by step, you know. If you think of the long term, like, oh my god, I'm leaving the country, I'm doing all this, it can be really overwhelming. But if you take it in small steps, like, okay, now I just have to get to the airport, now I just have to get on the plane, now I just have to sit through a 12-hour flight, you know, and it's in small chunks, so it becomes a lot easier to manage it at the time. Also, I'd say it's normal to be afraid if you're going to make such a big change, because it's natural to be afraid. If you weren't afraid, it would be more worrying.
Yes, so you'd be dead or something.
Yeah, it means your survival instincts aren't working.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just take that fear, but don't think of it as a bad thing. Think of it as, you know, you're aware. You're aware that something could go wrong. Or think of it even as fuel, you know, like it's the energy driving you forward. Because often before a big thing you feel scared and excited. Well, it's really, you know, chemically it's pretty much the same thing, it's just how you choose to label it. Also, when you are making a big move, keep your reason for going there in sight, you know, like think about why you're going there and use it as the sort of, I don't know, the carrots dangling in front of you, but the reminder of why you're doing it. Because if you get too caught up in the fact that things will be different, that things will be hard, well, of course they'll be hard at first, but if you don't lose sight of why you're going, of the kind of main reason, the dream you have, then yeah, I think that is what keeps you motivated. And yeah, and also this is more just sort of practical advice, but find somebody who's done it already, you know, and use them as a mentor, because there's no reason that you have to do everything on your own, because that's very scary. You know, find somebody who has made the same move and ask them for advice, ask them even to meet you there and help you out. And yeah,
that's a great point. But yeah, your point about the big carrot and everything, I think that's a really good point, because if we start focusing on all of the things that we don't want, and all the things that we think, oh, that could go wrong and that could go wrong, and I really don't want that to happen, I hope that's not going to happen, then we're kind of losing sight of the whole enjoyment of actually, seeing a new place, or finding out what life is like in a new country, or all of the exciting things that come up from a big change. I mean, for myself, I think, having that change in itself, if you've been stuck doing something that wasn't quite working for you for a while, just in itself, the change is like a breath of fresh air, you know.
Yeah, you see it as an adventure, don't see it as everything has to be perfect the second I get there. You're going to have times where you doubt it, you want to go home, but that's part of the experience, really.
Yeah, and I guess if you bring along a few favourite DVDs or something, you can get through it.
Exactly.
When it's getting a bit tough, you draw out the house DVDs, or at least that's what you do for me, probably.
Sure. Nice cup of tea.
Yes, bring some tea along, that's always helpful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's covered everything I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much for coming along. This is really such a great joy to be able to have an expert to ask some questions of. So, well, I hope that we'll be able to do this again sometime. Okay, so in the meantime, I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you liked it and you have some questions, then do leave some comments in the box below.
Please do.
And go on over to Gwyneth's site at magiclifecoaching.co.uk, where you can find more information about her and her courses and her confidence course. And I guess I'll see you next week. Have a great week, everyone.